Ray, for being with us yet again. As you know, we've seen a disturbing rise in domestic terrorism and far-right extremism across the United States, and we've heard from you several times about this.
That can then sometimes, as we've seen all too tragically, boil over or bubble over into outright violence.
And so how has the FBI worked to combat this propaganda and infiltration on our social media networks?
So our focus is on the foreign actor, China, Russia, Iran, and on their efforts. And so we work with the intelligence community, we work with our foreign partners, our friendly foreign partners, to try to uncover what those countries, Russia, China, Iran, are up to. And we try to share information about the hidden hand of the foreign actor where it's appropriate. We also engage in efforts to disrupt those foreign actors. The most recent example with the Russians, for example, is a Russian government-linked generative AI social media bot farm where they were posing as, among others, U.S. persons and not, in fact, U.S. persons, and trying to, again, sow various narratives. In that case, very heavily focused on the issue they picked there was, the war in Ukraine, and again, trying to kind of get everybody turned against each other. We've also seen that, though, from China and Iran. I mentioned China before. We've had a case where we charged, I think it was 34 Chinese Ministry of Public Security, MPS officers, for much the same kind of behavior, creating false personas, pretending to be Americans, and then trying to kind of sow narratives. In that case, in the Chinese case, their narratives were trying to, for example, undermine any suggestion that COVID was the product of a lab leak, or attacking U.S. law enforcement at the anniversary of George Floyd's death, for example. And then Iran, in 2020, we saw them undertake similar kinds of efforts that were disrupted in the I think October of 2020.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Director Ray, thank you for being here, and thank you for the information that you've provided today. I greatly appreciate it. This event that occurred, the attempted assassination of President Trump on July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania, was a level 5 alarm alert to this country that that our elected officials, our leaders, the president, the former president, are not safe, and we need to reevaluate from the ground up exactly how we are to go about providing that protection. The information you provided dealing with 8 cartridges from the roof, the drone, the fact that 2 explosive devices were found in the car, 1 at home, that was a remote detonation device that he had on him, the fact that his phone was using encrypted platforms. He only had 1 phone, correct?
Oh, sorry. He had 1 phone, although we've identified other phones that he may have used that may not have been his phone. So, for example, we think in certain instances he might have used his dad's phone. Again, not necessarily related to the attack, but we're trying to make sure that we process and exploit every device he could have used. And we keep, which is part of why I keep making this point, which I know you all are probably tired of me making, about this being an ongoing investigation, because we keep identifying new pieces of equipment, new accounts, what have you.
And the fact that you are in real time informing us about what you're finding as you're performing this investigation is very helpful, and clarifying the fact that he went to the range a day before and shot an AR. Now, my understanding is that the AR he used on the 13th was his father's. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. It was originally, his father bought it legally, but then our understanding so far is that his father then conveyed it to him, sold it, in fact, to his son. So originally his father's, at the time of the shooting, the shooter's.
That's okay. So that's new information. Was that provided to you by the father?
I think it was partly from that. I think we also saw some documentation to support it.
Okay. Investigators also have said that the shooter posted, quote, "July 13th will be my premiere. Watch it as it unfolds," on an online gaming platform sometime before he tried to assassinate President Trump. Can you confirm that, and how much time elapsed between this posting and the attempt on July 13th?
So I'm really glad you asked about that because that is a situation where, again, in our effort to give real-time information, since we've provided that information, we have since learned that July 13th premiere, profile page on the gaming platform, it turns out it was not the shooter,
Okay.
that it was some other individual as part of some sick joke who, after the shooting, created a profile page pretending to be the shooter.
Wow.
And so, of course, that person is now admitted to it. And, but anyway, my point being, among the other challenges that we as investigators have, you have people who create accounts in today's world, create accounts pretending to be somebody that they're, and it's not the actual person.
Now, the
So
shooter,
that's troubling, obviously, and it makes our jobs even harder as investigators.
thank you for clarifying that. Did he have an online gaming account?
We do believe he was a gamer and that he had different kinds of gaming accounts. So that's part of why
Any information gleaned from those?
Not yet, but again, some of those legal process returns I'm still waiting on.
Now, during the attempted assassination, Crooks was wearing a T-shirt from a popular YouTube channel. Have you been able to access his selection of YouTube videos that he's watched?
I believe we have seen some of his, search history, but I think we've got a ways to go on that. I know there's some
characterize it?
manual work that we're doing on that. I think the most notable thing that we found recently, which I don't think has been shared until today, is that on a laptop that the investigation ties to him, that on July 6th, it revealed a Google search, and his search, if it was him, again, it's a laptop tied to him. We obviously believe it's him, but we'll continue to investigate. But
What's
his
the
Google
distance?
search was,
How far away
how
was
far away was Oswald from Kennedy?
Right.
And
Horrifying.
yes, absolutely.
Can you clarify that you have in your possession all of the video that was taken on that day at the scene?
We've collected mountains of video. Part of the reason
Can you commit to providing us with that video?
Well, we're going to work with the committee and share information as best we can. Part of the reason I hedged on whether we have it all is, as you can appreciate, in today's world, everybody with a phone
Sure.
has the ability to take footage, and so we're finding things kind of left and right.
You have all the law enforcement video.
I believe we have all the law enforcement video, but we're still collecting evidence.
And I hope you would provide that to us and to the American people. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Director, just to be clear, the photo and the message on the online gaming account, I think your testimony was to Mr. Klein that was somebody else posing as the shooter. Is that right?
Correct. Somebody after
After the
July
fact.
13th
Okay.
created this
That's important.
profile, pretending to be the shooter, and
Okay.
sent us down a rabbit trail, which we've now tied off.
That's important information. Gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Director Ray, for being here. And I want to add my voice to the chorus of folks who were just devastated by the illness and passing of Sheila Jackson Lee. What a champion. Old young man.
Ready today. And then, of course, to address how people communicate in this country. And every day in our jobs, we see in social media, in terms of threats that we get, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of tips reported to us. And the language that's out there is just mind-bogglingly hateful and violent sounding. People sometimes, as figures of speech, use expressions that are very violent expressions. And so that is a part of it. We can all do better in kind of being a little more thoughtful and measured in our language. But again, the we got to stay in our lane. Our lane is the violence and the threats of violence. There's a role for everybody as Americans to try to see if we can take the temperature down.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for the extra time. I yield back.
Gentleman from North Dakota is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I really appreciate you correcting the gaming thing about this is my coming out party, because we're asking you to do something, and we've had acrimonious, you and I have actually had acrimonious interviews, but we're not here for a gotcha moment. We're just not on this. And we're asking you to give us information before the investigation is complete. My only recommendation or suggestion would be when that happens, don't necessarily wait till you ask, because don't wait for us to ask. Because and I'll go through why in a second. I appreciate you coming in. I appreciate you telling us things. I appreciate you guys going against essentially your normal policy of waiting till an investigation is done because the American people need to know it. But here's why. There's a guy with a rangefinder walking around that everybody noticed and then couldn't find. You know, he's scaled to the top of a roof within 150 yards line of sight to the presidential or Republican former presidential candidate by climbing a drain pipe. And then you said some equipment. He was being pointed out by rally goers everywhere they could, and nobody could figure it out. There's maybe supposed to be local law enforcement in the building, either upstairs or downstairs. And all of this is going on. And I was talking to a colleague of mine yesterday on the floor, and it's like, I hate the conspiracy theories that come out, but this is not the FBI's purview. This is the Secret Service's purview. This is so comically like inept to the average North Dakota citizen. Is just, they look at this and they're like, how could this possibly happen? And so when by you giving us information in a really meaningful way, even though we know the investigation's ongoing and things can change, that at least helps us to deal with that and figure out where we're at. And so, I mean, and you're doing all this. This guy had no combat training, no counter surveillance training that you're aware of, right?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear
He
that.
had no combat training.
Oh, no, I don't think any, certainly no what we would call, what you and I would call combat training. Obviously, he was a fairly active recreational shooter, so he did plenty of
A lot
shooting.
a lot of guys in
right.
Western
Yeah.
North Dakota, right? I mean, all of those different things. And somehow we came within under of an inch of a presidential candidate being shot and killed within 100 days out from an election. And when you look at it, so I just want to be really clear, because there is a lot of this. There is no evidence of another shooter, right?
I mean, another shooter.
Yeah.
I mean, there's the counter sniper who took out the shooter,
Well,
but right. But you're talking about like another.
Anybody else. And you're looking at his online and seeing all that, but there's no evidence he had any other accomplices on scene that day, correct?
Correct. Not that we've seen yet, certainly.
And you said, and Oversight's had a hearing, DHS had a hearing, we're having a hearing now. The Inspector General is going to investigate. We're probably announcing a bipartisan outside panel. But there's another investigation too, right? Because somebody has to clear the shooter. Like, even though it is a Secret Service officer deploying I mean, when an FBI agent kills somebody in the line of duty, what's the process?
So we have what we call an agent-involved shooting, is I think what you're getting at.
And they get
We have a whole process.
Usually get put on leave, paid leave, get a lawyer, depending on how it is, right?
Well, some of those things depend, but we have, our inspection division does a shoot review of each time when there's one of these situations. And they sometimes have to coordinate with local prosecutors who are also doing some kind of review. But so yes, Secret Service would have a similar kind of process for the counter.
I mean, because you have to actually establish one of the defenses to homicide. Just like, I mean, you don't do it in a court system the same way everybody else does, but you have to justify that shooting was justified. So when the FBI does that, do they conduct that all internally?
Most of the time, yes. Every once in a while, there's a situation where the Inspector General gets involved.
Do you know how the Secret Service does it?
I don't.
Okay. And I just think that's important, because when we're talking about how this works, and I don't think anybody is arguing it wasn't, anybody who's seen it knows what happens, but it's just knowing it and making sure that the process is handled correctly. And I just want to shift gears with my last 30 seconds really quickly, because we had a hearing on the northern border in Grand Forks, and you were talking about specific threats from Iran, but also generally. And we've diverted an exceptional amount of resources at the southern border. Our interactions, 114% increase in apprehensions. And the one specific thing, with all due respect to my friends and my neighbors from Canada, it's a lot easier to get into Canada for some of these countries where we have these real issues with terrorist threats than it is to the United States, particularly Iran. And are you guys monitoring that and making sure whatever coordination you have with Canada, that we're paying attention to that as well?
We have an excellent relationship, we, the FBI, with our Canadian counterparts, both RCMP, the Mounties, as some people euphemistically call them, and CSIS, my intelligence service counterparts. We have great relationships with them, and terrorism is, I find, probably the #1 thing we talk about.
Yeah, they're understaffed and overworked on the northern border, and they could use all the help you get. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thank you for today. I think I greatly appreciate your candor. I know it's highly unusual to go into this level of detail during an active investigation. And I know it's a special and unique circumstance given the nature of what happened that day. I'll ask my colleagues that we not try and take advantage of this in other circumstances. I think we need to be careful about pressuring our investigators, to disclose information in the middle of an investigation in a casual or routine way. But thank you for what you've done here today. I do want to mention this too, like Congressman Correa, I went up to Butler with Homeland Security Committee, and had a chance to meet with a number of the people there, including people who were there at the rally. And, several of them were elected officials. In fact, one of them that spoke with me a lot was sitting directly behind Mr. Trump when he was shot. And she had video that she'd taken, and she'd love to share it with you all. But she mentioned a couple of things too that I hope you all will have a chance to have conversations about. And I know some of it's going to be in the Secret Service lane, some's going to be in the FBI lane. But one of the things she talked about was the fact that the day before the shooting, she and other officials in the town and people who just wanted to prepare the stage showed up and started working on putting the bunting up and decorating it. But the point she noted was that none of them had been vetted. There was nobody there to keep an eye on them and make sure that everything that was being done was appropriate. And she actually sort of thought in the context of hearing that a gun was found or a gun was perhaps hidden at the site before the shooter was able to get it and use it. I don't know those details, but those are some of the things that came up that day. She also mentioned that there was sort of the outer perimeter. So you had a perimeter around the stage that the Secret Service had set up. Beyond that, you had a field, and then you had the building where the company was, and the shooter got on the roof. Apparently, there was a sort of a second level of a perimeter there that wasn't particularly restricted from an access standpoint, as with the street that was just beyond that. So she raised, and another elected official raised as well, issues about security that may actually kind of get into what you're talking about, whether the ladder was there, how the guy got on the roof. There are all sorts of issues with respect to that. And there was a lot of people, as you said, that had videotape. I talked to 3 that were showing me videos while I was standing out there in the grounds. But I had a couple of questions to ask of you briefly. Apparently, there was no Secret Service recordation of communications during that day. There's no radio runs, we call them, but there's no tapes. Do you know if there are any recorded conversations among law enforcement from that day?
I don't know the details of that. I believe there may be some, but I don't have in front of me exactly what we've seen or heard.
Okay. And then with respect to email communications, there were a lot of issues about, because my personal view, having gone to the site, was that they just shouldn't have had the rally there. It should not have been permitted. I thought there were just too many roofs. He picked one, but there was like a half dozen others that he could have picked on the other side of the field. And as Eli Crane, a congressman who was a sniper for the U.S. military, said, there was a water tower that actually would have been a better site, probably that Secret Service should have used, but could have been used as well. But had the lead up to that decision, and Congressman Correa raised this, who made this decision about how to pick the site? And apparently there was back and forth between local law enforcement, Secret Service, and the campaign. And I was kind of curious as to whether that's something that your investigation is going into or not.
So I think that primarily falls within the scope of the two other reviews, that is the DHS Inspector General review and the outside panel, independent panel that's been announced. Certainly, we are interviewing law enforcement personnel, but the security preparations, the adequacy of the security preparations.
That's the other lane?
That's the other
All right, I
lane.
only got 15 seconds left. Quick question for you with probably not a quick answer, but this scenario is kind of the worst case scenario from a couple of standpoints. Got a lone wolf shooter with no red flags that we've heard of so far. You know, nobody should have known that this was coming. He didn't have a criminal record and that sort of thing. Easy access to an assault weapon. I had a discussion like this with, I think, Congressman Roy and Congressman Bishop several months ago. What is it we can do to try and preempt those kinds of scenarios? We've got gun violence all over the country, including in my district. This is one example, but you know, this scenario is the worst possible that I can think of from the standpoint of no intervention prevention efforts that can be put in place to try and address it. But I'm kind of curious if you have any thoughts to the contrary on that.
I don't know that I have any magic solution to the problem, and I certainly don't want to be proposing, you know, legislative ideas. That's not really my role. Certainly, dangerous weapons, especially high-powered weapons, in the hands of the wrong person represent a real concern for law enforcement, including to law enforcement. Sometimes as the victims, as we saw very tragically down near Miami with two of our agents killed. That's probably all I can say on that. I do, while we're on the subject of firearms, Mr. Chairman, I have an answer to Congresswoman Dean's
Go right ahead.
question. I might as well
Go right ahead.
give it now, which is about the purchase of the firearm. I'm told that the father purchased the firearm in 2013, so quite a while ago, and then he sold it to his son in October of 2023.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back, and thank you, Mr. Director, for your great work.
I'd ask unanimous consent that we enter into the record a statement from Representative Kelly and some questions for the Bureau. Representative Kelly represents Butler. Actually, that's his hometown. So without objection, those will be entered into the record, and we'll make sure you get those, Director. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin, and this is not directly with you, actually, I just wanted to straighten something out. I know my colleagues, the gentlemen and the gentleladies from Georgia, Washington, California, Pennsylvania, they all mentioned Project 2025. Well, I don't know how they expect you to know about that, number one. I'm pretty damn involved. I don't really know a whole lot about it. But President Trump has made it clear, and we're going to say it again, we'll say it over and over again, that there are some things he disagreed with, some things he agreed with that he wasn't that familiar with. It was from the Heritage Foundation. And that was just raw politics, to be honest with you. It was just because 2025 has some things in it that they believe are really going to offend American people, and it very well may. And so they want to pin it on the presidential candidate. He didn't author it. He didn't condone it. He didn't put his seal of approval on it. It's getting old. It really is. We do this with other things. Just like in this committee, when anything goes wrong, anything, somehow Donald Trump's name has to be brought into it, and it gets tiring. It's politics over reality. Second thing about picking the site, I was intimately involved in the Wildwood rally, the biggest rally President Trump's ever had, biggest political rally in the state of New Jersey. I had spoken to the president about it, and he wanted to do it on the beach because we had over 100,000 people. And let me tell you, we had everybody out there because they were concerned, the Secret Service and the local police and the county police and just about every entity could be. And so they had, behind it was that iconic setting. They had the Ferris wheels on the pier and all this stuff. They had agents up in there. They had agents in the ocean, in the water, in boats. They had people coordinating, working with each other and talking with each other because they knew it was a risk. So we chose a site that was difficult. The president did, and I thought it was a great site. But nevertheless, the law enforcement responded properly. Something went wrong here. You can't blame this on Donald Trump as well. The site was chosen. It's the responsibility of those who serve in law enforcement to make sure that he was safe, period. And I'm sure you'll find out why. On another tangent here, I've got to wonder how many qualified people were passed in order for Director Cheadle to get her 30% quota. That's a lousy way to run an agency, especially when it's dealing with law enforcement, to say we've got to have 30% of anything. And I worry about these practices because it's policy over protection. And Director Ray, I know that some things were left to you. I understand that. But one of your early acts on the Biden presidency was hiring the FBI's very first chief diversity officer. And since that time, and even before your time, and you're going to disagree with me, but respectfully, I'm going to disagree with you. Recruitment standards under your lead has resulted in deterioration in many areas, including physical fitness, illicit drug use, financial irregularities, mental health issues, full-time work experience, and integrity. And I know you dismissed them, but in October 2023, they are a prestigious group of retired FBI special agents and analysts both expressed concern regarding the FBI's willingness to recruit agents that, quote, I'm not saying this, they said it, not me, can't even pass the new relaxed standards for fitness, who are illiterate in some cases and need lessons, educational lessons, don't want to work weekends or after hours, their words, and have serious disabilities or mental health issues, which is not the place for them. Most of your agents are great people. I love them. I love them for what they do. I'm not criticizing most, but these new standards, don't you think this is a hindrance and reduces the morale of the vast majority of good people that you have in the FBI? And I ask you for a quick answer because I have a few other things.
So I respect our retired agents, that many of them come to our graduations now. And I can tell you emphatically that they are those who think that we have lowered our standards, whether it's on physical fitness or anything else, are mistaken.
And you can prove that.
The facts
So
back me up on
The
that.
standards are the same today as they were a decade ago.
I'll give
I
you
mean, they've changed in
Well,
some ways that are appropriate.
in fact, the physical fitness standards, depends on how far back you go, but the physical fitness standards that our current graduates have to graduate from Quantico actually exceed some of the physical fitness standards that were in place if you go back far enough with some of our retirees. But what I would tell you, I think part of the reason there's confusion, and again, I accept that these folks are raising their concerns in good faith, but we have actually access to the facts. And part of the reason I think there's confusion, just take the physical fitness thing as an example, is that before you had to pass the physical fitness test before you showed up to Quantico. Now you have to pass it in order to get a badge at Quantico. The standard hasn't changed. You still have to pass the same test, the same 12-point standard, et cetera. All that stuff applies. The only difference is you can pass it while you're at Quantico. But if you don't pass that same test that's been in place for a long time now, you don't get a badge. And we will dismiss people from Quantico, and we do, who don't pass that
Director, I know I
test.
have to wrap this up, and I appreciate that. If you could get us information that substantiates what you say, that should be easy enough to do to the whole committee. I'd appreciate it. Feelings in this administration are more important than functionality. It's resulted in a border crisis. We don't have time to talk about that. You've spoken out about it. I appreciate that you've spoken out about it. And I think it's also resulted in shortages in our nation's law enforcement and our military, and I think it makes us less safe. So I look forward to seeing those statistics and that proof, because I have people talking in my ear that tell me otherwise, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Ray, I appreciate you being here today, and I certainly appreciate your forthcomingness and giving us information that I think that the American people want. And, to me, you have a very difficult job right now. In the past, and under Comey, certainly, the Russian collusion narrative got out pretty heavily, and that came out of the FBI with the FISA warrants and that sort of stuff, spot on General Flynn. And then the laptop issue, the Hunter Biden laptop issue, which the FBI actually had in their possession. So I have 800,000 people thereabouts that I represent, and our job is to restore trust. And so in a lot of the hearings we've had this week, they say, well, the FBI is investigating that. Every answer was the FBI is investigating this. And so in some ways it kind of landed in your lap, and I appreciate you being here. But, it's just, for me, the question of how does a 20-year-old acting alone get a long gun, a rangefinder? We know he bought a ladder. I guess he reconned here and realized he didn't need the ladder to get on top of the building, so he left it at the house. get on a roof within 150 yards of one of the most famous people in the world, I guess now, and a former president. How does that happen? And how do we restore trust in the American people that the FBI and the DHS, who is under Mayorkas's directorate now, how do we verify and get trust back to the American people that these agencies are really working to protect the president? And I'm not trying to place blame specifically, but I never thought that we'd raid his house. I never dreamed that they'd raid a former president's house. I certainly never imagined that they would actually indict him. And I felt, well, they'll never find him guilty. And now we've had a threat on his life. So how do we restore trust in the government of this country and the agencies that are here that we pay and provide $3 billion a year to the Secret Service to protect some of the leading political candidates in America? That's a lot. I'm sorry. That's a lot of questions, but I'm going to give you a little room to talk.
Right. No, listen, obviously you included a lot, as you said, in your question. And as you might imagine, I disagree fairly strongly with a number of parts of it. But sensitive to the time, I guess what I would say this, I can speak to my approach to running the FBI. Again, the FBI was not involved in the physical security of the rally. That's, we come in as the investigators afterwards. And as I've said before, our investigation is an investigation of the shooter and his attack. There are separate investigations, the Inspector General of DHS and this outside independent panel that's been announced that would be looking at the Secret Service's performance. And those, I think, will be important to trust and confidence, if you will, in Secret Service. But from the FBI perspective, we can't promise that everybody's going to like the results of what we do, right? What we can promise is that we're going to do our best to do the work in the right way. That's all we can do. And so I keep telling our folks every day on this and on everything else, our focus has to be, we got to do the work in the right way. We got to make sure we do the work in the right way. And then no matter who likes it, because everything we do, somebody doesn't like it.
It's a credibility issue at this point. Do the American people trust what the FBI and the DOJ is going to tell them? And, that's the thing with this. When I was early on, and I've only been here about 3.5, 4 years now, but the American people was the fear of the weaponization of government. So now we have this issue. Tucker Carlson asked the president, he said, are you afraid they'll kill you? And I remember that interview and I thought, wow, I can't believe he went there, but here we are. And so as we work through this process, I think it's so important, and I think the chairman hit on this, is the audio of the shooter. You've interviewed the sniper, the Secret Service sniper that took out the target. Was he waiting on a green light? What was going on, and why did Mr. Crooks have a chance to get off 8 rounds? And we knew he was on the rooftop. I don't know for how long, but we know he was a marked target. So was he trying to get the green light, and was somebody not giving it to him?
So again, the performance, the adequacy of the performance of Secret Service will be the subject of the Inspector General investigation and this outside independent panel. What I can tell you, and I'm glad you asked the question, because this goes to something that that was part of an earlier exchange. The first time that anybody from law enforcement saw the subject on the roof was a few minutes before the shooting, not with a gun. They didn't, at that point, they didn't, but local law enforcement, a few minutes before, saw him on the roof and started radioing.
Did he have a backpack going up the roof?
Well, we haven't found anybody yet who saw him climbing up the roof. The reason why I've talked about how we think he got on the roof is that's based on forensic, our evidence response team and forensic analysis, that we're, without getting into all the details, footprints and things like that we can, fingerprints, et cetera, that we can see how he got on. But we don't have an eyewitness at the moment who saw him climbing up. So a few minutes before the shooting, local law enforcement saw him on the roof. Again, no weapon identified at that point. A few seconds before the shooting is when the law enforcement officer that I've talked about already is the one who was assisted by another officer who saw up on the roof, saw the shooter in a prone shooting position with the gun. He turns.
How long did that happen before?
That sighting, that is the first time, to my knowledge, the first time anybody from law enforcement saw him with a weapon. That is seconds before he shot at President Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
So did the counter sniper not see the bad guy, the shooter, until after he fired a shot?
You mean until after the subject fired a shot?
Until after
I
the shooter?
don't, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It's possible we've already determined that, but I just, as I sit here right now, I don't have that, but I can,
I think that's the logical next question with where the gentleman from Alabama's question was going. The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Director Wray, to the best of your understanding, how close did the assassin's bullet come to killing President Trump?
my understanding is that either it or some shrapnel is what, grazed his ear. So I don't know that I have the actual
very close,
distance.
though.
What's that?
Very, very close, you would agree.
Yes.
Is this the biggest security failure that you've seen in your career?
Ooh. Well, certainly, I think former Director Cheadle has already, I think, acknowledged that this was a significant, at the very least, a significant operational failure. I forgot her exact words, but I will defer on that. I think
We
it
really
speaks for
haven't seen
itself.
anything like this in at least decades in this country, right?
The attempted assassination of a president, current or former, is a historic event.
Was this a sophisticated plot that Thomas Crooks carried out?
Well, I think probably depends on your definition of sophisticated, right? So, on the one hand, he's a 20-year-old, seems to, from what we've seen so far, loner, without a lot of elaborate criminal history, without any criminal history or anything like that. On the other hand, he did clearly do some level of planning and recon.
When did the planning start, to the best of your knowledge?
What's that?
When did the planning start?
Well, we're still drilling into that, but we know, we assess that on and that's when he used the drone that I've talked about already today. And then, of course, fast forward till just after 6 o'clock when the worst happened. He shot at President Trump.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
So did the counter sniper not see the bad guy, the shooter, until after he fired a shot?
You mean until after the subject fired a shot?
Until after
I
the shooter?
don't, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It's possible we've already determined that, but I just, as I sit here right now, I don't have that, but I can,
I think that's the logical next question with where the gentleman from Alabama's question was going. The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Director Wray, to the best of your understanding, how close did the assassin's bullet come to killing President Trump?
my understanding is that either it or some shrapnel is what, grazed his ear. So I don't know that I have the
Very,
actual
very close,
distance.
though.
What's that?
Very, very close, you would agree.
Yes.
Is this the biggest security failure that you've seen in your career?
Ooh. Well, certainly, I think former Director Cheadle has already, I think, acknowledged that this was a significant, at the very least, a significant operational failure. I forgot her exact words, but I will defer on that. I think
We
it
really
speaks for
haven't seen
itself.
anything like this in at least decades in this country, right?
The attempted assassination of a president, current or former, is a historic event.
Was this a sophisticated plot that Thomas Crooks carried out?
Well, I think probably depends on your definition of sophisticated, right? So, on the one hand, he's a 20-year-old, seems to, from what we've seen so far, loner, without a lot of elaborate criminal history, without any criminal history or anything like that. On the other hand, he did clearly do some level of planning and recon.
When did the planning start, to the best of your knowledge?
What's that?
When did the planning start?
Well, we're still drilling into that, but we know, we assess that on July 6th,
So a week in advance.
for example, it seems to be that he seems to become very focused on it, because that's when, as I've testified here today, that's when the laptop that we've tied to him has the Google search, how far away was Oswald from Kennedy?
I mean, that seems like an indication of a total amateur, right? Someone who's searching for that, and he's doing it a week in advance.
Again, I don't want to characterize him. I frankly don't want to give him the credit of characterizing him as amateur or professional. But what I will say is that there are some things he did that involve a certain amount of planning and preparation. On the other hand, if you're telling me, do I think this is the most sophisticated ever? Of course not. We deal with much more sophisticated adversaries all the
And
time.
you probably prepare for more sophisticated plans to target high-level
I'm
officials.
sorry, I couldn't
You
hear you.
probably prepare for more sophisticated plans to target high-level officials, correct?
We don't do physical security, but yes, obviously we're investigating
Sure.
much more sophisticated attacks all the time.
How about the encrypted applications on his phone? Were those there for a while, or did he download them, in the days or weeks leading up to the assassination attempt?
I don't have the answer to that sitting here right now. I think it may vary from platform to platform, because he had a number of encrypted messaging apps on it. And again, as I've said, we're trying to get access to that content. And that's important. I think it's important for everybody on this committee to understand that this is a real problem for law enforcement. That these companies, let's be clear here, these companies are designing their platforms in a way to, no matter how heinous the crime, no matter how rock
Yes, sir,
solid the legal
understood. I'm
process
run out of
to
time,
get
so I want to
access.
get
Yeah.
the next question. At this moment, are you confident that high-level protectees, presidents, former presidents, are well protected?
Well, it's not really for me to say. I have a lot of respect for the men and women of the Secret Service who provide protection, just as I do for their counterparts at other agencies.
You can't say one way or the other. Your assessment as director of the FBI whether the president is safe?
I'm not an expert on protective details and physical security. What I would tell you is that we have a very robust system for sharing threat information with those agencies, and that in my experience, the men and women of the Secret Service are professionals who are hardworking, who are literally willing to take a bullet for their protectee.
You mentioned a thwarted assassination attempt against former President Bush. Are there any other thwarted assassination attempts against current or former presidents that you could discuss?
Not that immediately come to mind, but, I'd have to go back and think about that. I mean, obviously we've been around for a while, and current and former presidents are high-profile targets who are attractive to all kinds of bad guys.
There's also been reports that the shooter's parents called local law enforcement to say he was missing on the day of the shooting. Is that correct? And if so, is that something that you would see as a sort of a natural thing for them to do? It seems like a 20-year-old who's been missing for a few hours. Maybe his parents don't, first thing they do, call the police. What was going on with that situation?
So my recollection, I don't have this in front of me. My recollection is they did call, concerned that he was missing. My recollection, though, is that they didn't call until this was after I think this was after the event. But I'm not certain of that, so I want to, hedge on that slightly, because I have to get back to you to confirm that. I believe that part of the issue was that when he last saw his father, he, I think, indicated to his father that he was going to shoot at the range. And then, of course, he didn't go to the range and he didn't come back from that. And so I think that may have added to the level of concern.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Ray, I'm going to go a little bit different route with my questioning. In testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee in December of last year, you stated that the FBI is, quote, especially concerned about the possibility of Hamas supporters engaging in violence on the group's behalf, end quote, and that the threat from a, quote, terrorist organization who may exploit the attacks in Israel as a tool to mobilize their followers around the world, end quote. We've seen a lot of conduct today that I think is concerning to many people in terms of Hamas terrorists and their sympathizers. Reports have surfaced alleging that many of the groups intimidating and violating the civil rights of Jewish American students, like the Students for Justice for Palestine, received guidance and financial support from American Muslims for Palestine, and that AMP's directors allegedly have links to groups which fundraise for Hamas. Director Ray, is the Bureau aware of or investigating whether these groups violating the civil liberties of Jewish Americans are connected to or affiliated with Hamas or other terrorist organizations?
So we are investigating a lot of attacks and threats against the Jewish community. I've been very vocal on how big a concern that is, and certainly that was already heightened even before October 7th, and since October 7th, it went to a whole nother level. We are actively engaged with Jewish community, both locally and nationally. When it comes to foreign terrorist organizations and their role, or foreign adversaries and their role, we are looking hard to see if we can find linkage, for example, funding or things like that. Nothing that I can report at this time, but it's something.
But you're investigating
It
it.
is the kind of thing that we're looking for, absolutely,
Okay.
because we know that there's an interest in their part to foment.
We're watching it in
Yes.
real time
Right,
today.
yes.
There are other reports that Mayor Bitar, National Security Council Coordinator for Intelligence and Defense Policy and Deputy Assistant to the President, was an active member in Students for Justice in Palestine at Georgetown University, which is one of the groups alleged to have ties to Hamas. Is the Bureau investigating whether the Biden-Harris administration is compromised by pro-Hamas groups and organizations?
Well, again, we're having quite a number of Hamas-related investigations.
I'm
I
asking
can't-
specifically
can't-
about whether you are investigating whether the Biden-Harris administration has been compromised by pro-Hamas groups.
There's nothing along those lines that I can think of to report.
I also want to talk to you a bit about the FBI's investigation and involvement with the Russia collusion hoax. And the FBI was involved with that because of its potential relationship to election interference. Is that correct? The FBI's involvement in investigating the Russia collusion hoax. That was because there was concern about election interference. Is that correct?
Well, the FBI was involved and staffed as investigators the Special Counsel Mueller investigation into efforts by the Russian government to influence and interfere.
With the election, correct?
Yes.
All right. So is the FBI investigating what just happened with Joe Biden being forced out of the race after winning the Democrat primary as election interference? Is the FBI investigating that right now?
I'm
What's
not,
happened just in
I'm
the
not
last
aware
couple
of any
weeks?
investigation along those lines.
Director Ray, it was reported in March that the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force resumed communication with social media companies. And an FBI spokesman has stated that, quote, in coordination with the Department of Justice, the FBI recently implemented procedures to facilitate sharing information about foreign malign influence with social media companies in a way that reinforces that private companies are free to decide on their own whether and how to take action on the information, end quote. Director Ray, what specifically is the FBI doing to reinforce that such decisions are in fact for the private companies to make and not the administration?
So I think the best way to summarize it is that the guidance makes all kinds of additional steps to underscore that the FBI has no interest in participating in any way whatsoever in the company's decision-making, that companies are completely free to take any actions on their own, that we are simply passing information on to them for them to do whatever it is they want to do independently, consistent with, I should say, I very much appreciate the Supreme Court's finding that no evidence that the FBI coerced platforms to take content down.
Well, I don't believe that that's what the Supreme Court found. What the Supreme Court found was that the parties involved didn't have standing. But I think there's a whole body of evidence and legal analysis demonstrating that, in fact, this administration was violating the First Amendment rights of folks through social media companies. I'm just going to ask one final very quick question. If the FBI was involved in the removal or restriction of speech of Americans, do you agree that this would be a violation of the First Amendment?
Well, again, I'm not going to engage in hypotheticals. My understanding and my strong view from everything I've seen is that we did not violate the First Amendment.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Director. I've just got two easy questions for you. In February, Donald Trump Jr. received a letter containing a white suspicious powder that read, quote, "Lee Harvey Oswald's grandson must complete his contract," end quote. The United States Secret Service and the FBI said they would investigate the matter, and 5 months later, no more information has been released. I've also visited with Mr. Trump, and he has not received any information either. Why is that?
So as I sit here right now, I'm not familiar with the specific investigation, but I do know that we have had, unfortunately, quite a few investigations of threatening mailings and white powder letters and things like that. So I'm happy to drill into it and have us circle back to you and see if there's more information we can share about it.
Thank you. And would you maybe circle back to the Mr. Trump, Donald Jr.? I think they'd like an update as well.
Sure. Let me, again, I don't, like I said, I'm
Okay.
not familiar with the specifics, but I'm happy to have us look into it and get back to whoever we need to get back to.
Thank you. Next question. The Pittsburgh field office now handling the assassination attempt investigation. Is that right?
Well, there's several, their Pittsburgh field office is the lead office. We obviously have lots of, I think it's about half, maybe over half of the FBI's field offices are working on this, including almost every headquarters division. So we have lots and lots and lots, several hundreds of employees working on it.
All right.
But yes.
Pittsburgh's the lead. Okay. This is the same office that botched the Hunter Biden laptop case. And they, in my view, and my constituents and many Americans, displayed a clear reluctance. That's a quote, reluctance to really do any tasking, quote, effectively failing to investigate, according to the U.S. attorney on the case. My question is, how can we trust this office, and why does it keep reappearing in critical election-related investigations, or is that just dumb luck?
So I want to be a little bit careful on what I can say here, because some of what you're talking about relates to an ongoing investigation being led by the special counsel, Mr. Weiss. But what I can tell you is that the Pittsburgh field office's involvement in the matter you're talking about was the choice by the Attorney General Barr to have the U.S. Attorney and the FBI field office in Pittsburgh handle that particular matter. As to your summary or characterization of what U.S. Attorney, now former U.S. Attorney Brady actually said, I'd have to see the whole context. I'm not quite sure that's what he said, but I think as to your overall question about confidence, what I would tell you is that's the point I'm trying to make about the sheer breadth of our investigation. Yes, the Pittsburgh field office is the office on the ground. That's where the attempted assassination happened. But we are using the full might of the FBI, criminal and national security. That's why I'm pointing out that multiple field offices, over half of our field offices, almost every headquarters division, several hundreds of employees. These are people who are working around the clock to deal with this historic attack. And I have the utmost confidence in those hundreds of employees, agents, analysts, and professional staff, and the American people should too.
I yield to Mr. Jordan.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. Director, I guess I'm not clear exactly where you said there were 8 shell casings on the roof, so 8 bullets were fired. We obviously know that Mr. Comparatori lost his life. Two other rally goers were injured, seriously injured, and then the one that hit President Trump. does that account for, there were some of these individuals hit multiple times? Where did all 8 bullets go is, I guess, my question.
I don't have that in front of me. I'm happy to circle back and get that to you. It's assuming we have that information
Mhm.
yet. As I said, I think with respect to former President Trump, there's some question about whether or not it's a bullet or shrapnel that that hit his ear. So it's conceivable. Although, as I sit here right now, I don't know whether that bullet, in addition to causing the grazing, could have also landed somewhere else. But I believe we've accounted for all of the shots in the cartridges. So let us get
And
that.
it's my understanding that the very first one was the one that hit the president. Is that the very first shot, or is that not accurate?
I don't, as I sit here right now, I don't know the answer to that. I believe we know the answer to that. I just don't have it in front of me.
Okay, okay. Is there any chance I mean, it seems to me that this bad guy, this shooter was focused on President Trump, but you indicated that he purchased 50 rounds of ammunition, I believe, earlier that day. Do you have any indication thus far in your investigation that in addition to going after and trying to assassinate the former president, he was also looking to do a lot more damage to other individuals?
That's a hard question to answer. What I would say is I agree with you that his preparatory activity is what we've seen so far, the limited information that has been relevant and interesting about his preparatory activity does seem to be that he had settled on former President Trump as a target and this rally as his moment to try to take a shot. But in addition to the 50 rounds, of course, you have the issue of these explosive devices.
Right.
And so what else he may have had in mind is something that I think is very much of an open question. On the one hand, you have these explosive devices, including the one still back in his home that wasn't in quite the same stage as the one in the the ones in the vehicle. But he clearly had those explosive devices for some reason. And so we're trying to figure that out. As I've said before, sometimes in these kind of situations, you find like a manifesto or something like that. It's frustrating to us, and I'm sure frustrating to you and the American people, that we haven't found anything quite like that. We'd love to have a roadmap that tells us exactly what he was thinking. We haven't found that yet. Doesn't mean we won't. We're looking all over the place, and we're going to leave no stone unturned.
Thank you. A gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Director, for being here today. I know it's been a very long day, busy day on Capitol Hill, and also I want to apologize in advance if there's any repetitive questions from me. But I have to ask, given that our sitting president resigned from the campaign on Sunday and the Secret Service Director resigned yesterday, you don't plan on resigning anytime soon, do you, sir?
No, sir.
Good to go. Earlier today, you told this committee that you recovered 8 bullet cartridges from the roof next to the shooter. And given that testimony, I have 2 questions for you. How many shots were fired at President Trump, and how many shots were fired in total of the entire day? I know I keep hearing 8, but were there any more that were unaccounted for?
The best information I have right now is 8 shots. As to the sequence, I'm not sure I have that sitting here right now. As I said to the chairman, I'm going to go back to my team and see if we've got that nailed down yet. And if we have, I'm happy to share it with you and the rest of the committee.
Please do, sir. Thank you very much for that. You also mentioned that the shooter used encrypted messages to communicate. Specifically, do you know what apps or what apps he was using to communicate, and can you confirm if he was communicating with any foreign nationals through the encrypted messages?
So as to the names of the apps, I don't have that right here in front of me. As far as communicating with any foreign actors, I'll say 2 things. One, we haven't, as I think I've testified before, but we have not, at the moment at least, identified any accomplices or co-conspirators, foreign or domestic. So that as to foreign contacts, of course, that's part of why we want to get access to the encrypted messages, because that might tell us whether he'd been in contact with somebody.
Thank you. Let's talk about motive. I know the FBI has taken a lead role in investigating the assassination on President Trump. Your team has searched the shooter's phone, conducted countless interviews, done extensive research into his motives. As of today, July 24th, 2024, do you and your team know the motive of the shooter or have any idea on what could have driven it?
Well, know and have any idea are two very different things.
Okay.
We do not know the motive. That is obviously one of the central questions in our investigation. And it's been very frustrating to us that a lot of the usual kind of low-hanging fruit places that we would find at have not yielded significant clues about his motive. Having said that, we have seen indications that he was interested in public figures, and that in the period around July 6th, leading up to July 13th, he does seem to have become very focused on this particular rally and former President Trump. But exactly what his thought process was in doing that, that's something that's still very much under investigation.
I want to make something clear to the American people to try to help out what motive could be. And again, it's not my job to steer it, but here are some of my thoughts. I'm not sure about motive either, specifically, but I can tell you that after this assassination attempt, people on both sides have said that both parties need to tone down the rhetoric. But recently, just on Monday, in fact, President Biden called into the Harris campaign event and said that President Trump was a threat to democracy. Just take a look behind me at these photos. This is a magazine cover of the New Republic from June 2024, published just 1 month before the assassination attempt on President Trump. In a tweet explaining the cover, the New Republic said this: "Today, we at the New Republic think we can spend this election year in one of two ways. We could spend it debating whether Trump meets the 9 or 17 points that define fascism, or we could spend it saying he's damn close enough and we'd better fight. We unreservedly choose the latter course." Sir, I know you said that the FBI doesn't have a clear motive yet, and you've explained that. But in your professional experience as an investigator, do you think that language like this could radicalize someone to engage in political violence?
I certainly understand the point of the question. What I would tell you is that, respectfully, I don't think it's appropriate for me as FBI director to be characterizing or engaging in public commentary on specific people's rhetoric. And that's because it's not that I don't understand why you're raising the question, but I'm saying that in my role, I have to be very careful to make sure we speak through our work and we speak through our cases and our intelligence products, not the FBI director chiming in the public square on different people's political commentary.
I understand. For the record, there was an assassination attempt on an American president, and I will be asking these same questions, even if it were President Biden. And my message to the American people is that we need to do better. I yield back the rest of my time, and thank you for being here, sir. I know it's been a very long day.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Director, for being here. It's refreshing. I was in the Oversight hearing earlier this week, and although we don't have an idea on everything, your ability to come in here and actually give way more than Director Cheadle ever did is somewhat refreshing. You saw some pretty bipartisan frustrations exhibited in that particular hearing. I'm sure you've seen part of it. I want to follow up on a couple of lines of questions that I had with Director Cheadle that she actually answered, which was remarkable. One, she had indicated that Secret Service at the Trump rally did not have any radio recordings. Is that, in your investigation, is that accurate?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I believe there may be some recordings on the local law enforcement side. As to whether or not we have recordings on the Secret Service side, I'd have to drill back into that. And the reason you might say, well, how the heck can you not know? Well, we certainly have interviewed lots of Secret Service employees. So what we know from the interviews versus some other source, as I sit here right now, I don't know.
So on this particular case, but in your experience, and again, it's a different agency, but she had indicated, Director Cheadle had indicated that recordings sometimes are done from radio recordings, I guess, of what happens at a Trump rally or any other thing that they're engaged in. Is that your experience as well, that sometimes there are audio recordings of communications between law enforcement officials?
Just speaking very broadly, there are times when there are recordings, but it'd be hard for me to be more precise than that.
And I know that you can't answer whether they were here in this instance or not, but what would cause recordings to not exist for the Trump rally, if, as a hypothetical, what would be the reason that would happen?
I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. I mean, if they didn't record, there may be situations where they just don't record in the first place, and why that would be, though, I'm not sure I can answer that.
Thank you. Let me ask you this, and this is another line of questioning. Director Cheadle had indicated that seconds before the assassin, the would-be assassin, fired the shot, is roughly seconds, is when he became a person of suspicion to an actual threat. Would you agree with that assessment from Director Cheadle?
Well, let me try it this way. I think there are sort of three, in my mind, there's sort of three, let's say three significant moments on this continuum that you're kind of getting at. There is roughly an hour before the shooting when local law enforcement observes the individual, the shooter. At that point, as somebody that was a person of concern. I forgot the exact phrasing, and that was based on seeing him with this rangefinder, no observation of a weapon, but there was something odd and off about them that caught local law enforcement's attention. So that's the first moment. Then there's a second moment, which is, I think just minutes before the shooting, where local law enforcement observed him on the roof, but didn't see a weapon, is my understanding at that point. And at that point, their level of concern obviously was even higher. And then there's the third moment, which is that moment when local law enforcement saw him, the officer who climbed up with the assistance of his colleague and
Correct.
saw the shooter in the prone position with the weapon, and that's seconds before the event. And so, terminology, I'm not sure, but it
That's
seems
fine.
to me there's an evolution of concern over that time period.
Correct, and an escalating concern. At what point, and this again, I just don't know, so I'm curious, at what point is, say, the sniper who killed Mr. Crooks, at what point is he able to fire a shot, and does he have to have authorization in which to do that?
I don't know that I know Secret Service's rules of engagement in that situation. It's possible that our interview of the counter sniper has uncovered that. Again, our focus has been, I certainly understand why you're asking the question, but our focus has been on the shooter himself and his actions and the attack. These two other reviews, the DHS Inspector General and the outside independent panel, are both looking at the performance of the Secret Service, which would, I'm confident, include the question that you're talking about.
Thank you. And I actually think, from a legislative purpose and what this body will probably ultimately do, it's of great importance that we break down barriers of communication and that we allow, officers to do their job without, so that this doesn't happen again. And I appreciate you being here. Thank you, Director.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Well, once again, as Congressman Fry said, we want to thank you for your time and a lot more information today than Monday. So thank you for that. I just have a handful of questions. I would love to have just a simple yes or no so we could get done with this. So on day one, President Biden issued an executive order mandating DEI programs in the executive branch. You responded by hiring FBI's first ever chief diversity officer. You're even on the Bureau's website quoting saying that diversity and inclusion of the workforce is something I care deeply about because the success of our efforts impacts our operations, our culture, and our future. End of quote. So Director, just a simple yes or no, do you still find DEI hiring practices to be central to the FBI's operations, cultures, and future?
I believe that diversity is an important part, is a core value of a high-performing organization.
Do you have any concerns that our Homeland Security efforts will be hampered if the FBI continues to use DEI as a primary hiring measure?
I don't believe that we use DEI as a primary hiring metric. I would say that we have not lowered our standards.
Yes
and
or
I
no,
feel,
please?
if I could finish, it's not a yes or no question. We have not lowered our standards, and the facts back that up.
Are you aware of a 112-page report compiled by senior agents and analysts which stated, quote, If the current trajectory of the FBI special agent recruitment and selection continues, using DEI as the primary and sole measure of our homeland security efforts will be significantly hampered. Do you know about that 112-page report?
I'm aware of a report from a number of anonymous former employees.
Thank you. Do you agree that protecting the former president falls under the umbrella of homeland security?
Well, protecting the former president, the physical security, the protective detail on the former president is the province of the Secret Service, which is part of the Department of Homeland Security.
It is my understanding that historically the FBI had 100,000 applications for special agents on file at any given time of the year. So talking about slipping recruitment, are you aware that on February of 2024, a letter from the FBI's Assistant Director for Training Division, which reported that FBI only received an estimated 48,000 applications over a 2-year period?
I don't know if we're comparing apple to apple. What I can tell you is that in the time that I've been FBI director, the number of Americans applying to be special agent has gone up dramatically. To the tune of, in some cases, double or triple the pace
So
it
the
was when
48,000
if I
is
could
wrong?
finish, sir, if I could finish, please, to a rate that is higher, you'd have to go back about a decade or so to find the number of Americans applying to be special agents that are currently applying.
Okay, so for the record, that 48,000 is probably wrong then in your eyes?
I don't know, I don't have the letter in front of me, but what I'm
Appreciate
not sure of is that we're comparing apple to apple in
Okay.
terms of time periods and everything else.
In advance of the Trump shooting, United States Secret Service Special Agent in charge Tim Burke reportedly told law enforcement partners that NATO summit in Washington, D.C. limited his resources available to the Trump rally. The service has similar DEI hiring aims and failed their zero-fail mission to protect President Trump. Director Cheadle has since stepped down. Could the hyperfixation on hitting Biden administration's imposed DEI rules by causing the FBI and the federal law enforcement agencies to not only miss their prime candidates, but also potential threats?
Well, I can't speak to Secret Service's hiring practice. What I can tell you is that in my view, diversity, like everything else, is something that has to be done in the right way. Just like everything else, there's a right way and a wrong way to achieve it. I think we can and have achieved improvements in diversity and at the same time not lowered our standards. And I think part of the reason we've been able to do that is because of the encouraging increase in the
Thank
number
you.
of Americans applying to be special agents.
The investigation to the planting of pipe bombs at the RNC and DNC headquarters has been going on for over 3.5 years and will soon have lasted longer than the Biden presidency. I look forward to you proving yourselves because we haven't received any update right now on the Trump shooting since July 15th, and the people really need that. Can the public expect a more transparent and timely investigation into the attempted assassination of former President Trump?
I've been testifying here all day about the investigation into attempted assassination of former President Trump, and we've done multiple briefings, and I've answered multiple questions.
And we appreciate that because,
Okay,
it's, like I
that's
said,
what
it's
you
a
were
lot-
asking.
Well, it just seems like there hasn't been a press conference to the people to go through all the different details that were already presented today. And I'll just leave you with one final question. The government is not doing their job. Do you feel as the director that perhaps like not only the FBI, but the Secret Service needs to have a complete reconstruction? Do you think it's still put together the way that could best do its job?
The FBI that I see every single day, having visited all 56 of our field offices at least twice, many of them 3 times, the FBI that I see engaging with state and local law enforcement from all 50 states that I hear about from prosecutors, judges, business leaders, community leaders, foreign partners, is an FBI that is respected, trusted, appreciated, and that is there for people when they need them the most. And that is the FBI that I see, and I'm very proud to be a part of them.
Any comment on the other agencies?
No, I'm not going to comment on other agencies.
Appreciate your time, sir. Yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back. Director, I have just a couple quick questions, but I want to give to the ranking member a chance to say some remarks or questions, and then we'll be done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I'd like to say, as somebody, when I grew up, I watched The Untouchables, and I think Elliot Ness would be proud of you. I don't know about J. Edgar Hoover, but Elliot Ness for sure. Let me ask you this. In Memphis, you put Memphis and Nashville's FBI together, kind of consolidated, and in one office. And we have, I know you've worked with our U.S. attorney and others to work on our crime situation there, and it's gotten better. But it's this change in the FBI relationship there where we're not going to have an office necessarily. Tell me how that's going to affect Memphis.
So I want to be very clear. We're not leaving Memphis. What we are doing is
Nobody should leave Memphis. In
Right.
fact, most of the songs are about people
Right.
going to Memphis.
we
They
are
leave Nashville, they go to
we-
Memphis.
recognizing population growth and the threat environment. We have instead taken, if you look across the state, instead of having 2 field offices in Knoxville and Memphis, we're creating a Tennessee division headquartered in the middle in Nashville. But we are keeping the offices in Knoxville and Memphis. And in fact, when it comes to Memphis specifically, not only will it not result in any decrease in the number of agents there to work, actually, strange as it might sound, it's going to allow us to increase the number of agents who will be assigned to the Memphis office, including to tackle things like violent crime, which I know is of huge concern. And the reason for that is really the effect of this reorganization is to be able to reduce administrative roles that will be more consolidated in the middle in Nashville, but it'll allow us to increase the operational roles, the agent roles, the number of them in Memphis. So I think not only are we not leaving Memphis, we're actually increasing our investigative presence in Memphis as part of this, and we're going to be able to continue to collaborate closely with our great partners there without skipping a beat.
Thank you. That's reassuring. One of the questions was asked over here was about previous assassination attempts on presidents. And obviously, I know you're a lot younger than me, but you probably did. Did you ever watch The Untouchables?
I have watched it, yes.
They had one of the programs was on Mayor Cermak. You don't know Mayor Cermak?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Mayor Cermak, do you know who he was?
I do not.
He was the mayor of Chicago. And in February of 1933, there was an assassination attempt on Franklin Roosevelt in Miami, Florida. And Mayor Cermak, C-E-R-M-A-K, was killed and said, "I'm glad it was me and not you." Allegedly, he said that. But anyway, that was an attempt and it failed. And that was, Untouchables brought it into my consciousness. But thank you for your work. I appreciate it very much. And I appreciate you're not looking into changing our Democratic nominee. That's something we normally do. Thank you.
Director, I'm still not clear in my mind. When did the counter snipers, the good guys, when did they first get eyes on the bad guy, the would-be assassin, on the roof of the AGR building?
I'm not certain, but I'll take my best effort here.
I guess I'm sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
did they have eyes on him before the local law enforcement was looking up on the roof and engaged with the bad guy shooter?
I don't know the answer to that. I will look into that and get back to you. I believe we have the answer. I just don't know that I have it. I want to make sure I answer accurately.
Because we thought from the briefings that Mr. Abbott gave us, or Bate gave us, excuse me, Abate gave us, and the briefings you gave to Congress, that they did, but it wasn't clear from your testimony. So if you can get that answer to us, that would be helpful. I want to circle back just a third time, if I could, to the Iranian threat to President Trump and some others, former members of our government. The reason I want to go back to that, because we now know that the Secret Service and Homeland Security denied resources to President Trump's detail that they had asked for. And it seems to me, if that all happened after you guys knew about the Iran threat and had briefed the Secret Service on that real threat, that's an even bigger problem. And that's why I was trying to get that timeline down, when you knew about it and when you briefed the Secret Service on the Iranians' threat to kill President Trump.
So again, I really want to be careful to both be accurate, but also not to kind of stray into any kind of classified information or confirm the existence of classified information. So let me see if there's a way for us to get back to you on that question. I understand why you're asking. It may be easier to answer than I think, but at the moment in an open hearing, I'm not sure if I can see the right way to do that.
Fair enough. We'll expect answers to both those questions, and you can get back to this. That'd be great. Finally, anything else you want to tell us that we didn't ask? I mean, you came today and you told us some things that weren't even prompted by questions, and I just want to make sure if there's anything else you want to tell us regarding July 13th and what you've discovered, now's the time.
Well, again, we're going to continue to engage with the Congress. I think we've covered a lot of the points that I really wanted to make sure that I got across, and just as I'm looking at my list, in one way or another through the course of today's questioning, I think we've gotten through most of it.
That concludes today's hearing. We thank our witness for appearing before the committee today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.